My name is Claire, and for 8 long years, I worked inside that mansion, walking its endless halls, polishing furniture that cost more than my entire yearly salary, and following rules that never really made sense to me. I was a housekeeper, but honestly, sometimes I felt more like a ghost myself, just another quiet shadow drifting from room to room, trying not to be noticed. But trust me when I say this, nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I was about to discover about Mr. Whitaker and his daughter, Emily. Before I get too deep into this story, I just want to say something real quick. If you like hearing true stories like this, if you want me to keep opening up about things I've kept bottled inside for years, do me a favor, hit that like button. It takes just a second, but for me, it means knowing someone out there is listening. Someone cares. All right, back to the story. I remember the first day like it happened yesterday. It was a gray Tuesday morning when I first stepped onto the Whitaker estate. The air was cold and damp, and the fog made the massive front gates look like something out of an old Gothic novel. I was nervous, my palms sweaty as I pressed the intercom button. A voice crackled through the speaker, giving me permission to enter. I walked up the stone path, heart pounding, carrying my tiny suitcase like it held my whole life inside. In a way, it did. I had been looking for work for months. Bills were piling up, and I was at the point where I would have taken just about anything. When I saw the job listing for a live-in housekeeper on one of those sketchy classified websites, I almost skipped it. But something about the way it was worded caught my eye. It said, "Discretion required, long hours, high pay." I figured, what's the worst that could happen? The first time I saw Mr. Whitaker in person, I froze. Not because he was intimidating in the traditional sense. He wasn't tall or muscular, and he didn't have that loud, booming voice you'd expect from some rich guy barking orders. No, it was something else. There was this coldness in his eyes, like he was looking right through me, scanning every part of me, calculating whether I was trustworthy or not. He barely spoke during the interview, just sat there behind his massive oak desk, fingers steepled under his chin, letting his assistant ask most of the questions. "You'll follow the schedule. Stick to your assigned quarters. Never enter the West Wing unless instructed," the assistant said, reading from what looked like a rehearsed script. "If you see the young miss, do not engage unless she speaks to you first. Understood?" The young miss. I didn't know her name yet. They didn't say it. It was just the young miss. I nodded, feeling a lump grow in my throat. I didn't ask questions. I needed the job too badly. My room was in the basement, small but clean. They gave me a uniform and a laminated sheet with my daily tasks. Dusting, vacuuming, laundry. Pretty standard stuff, though the list of restricted areas was unusually long. The West Wing, the library, the third-floor balcony, and of course Mr. Whitaker's study. No surprises there, I guess. Rich people love their privacy. But what stood out most that first day was Emily. I first saw her standing by the window at the end of the second-floor hallway. She was wearing a pale blue dress, her dark hair falling messily over her face. She stood so still that, for a second, I thought she was one of those creepy porcelain dolls people collect. When I moved closer to dust the picture frames along the wall, she turned her head ever so slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her face. She looked hollow. That's the only way I can describe it. Her skin was pale, almost grayish under the hallway light. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, like she wasn't really seeing what was in front of her. I gave her a small smile, more out of instinct than anything else. "Good morning," I whispered, careful not to startle her. She didn't respond, just turned away slowly and walked back into one of the rooms, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The other staff members, well, the few that worked there, avoided talking about her. When I asked Martha, the cook, about Emily later that afternoon, she just shook her head. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to," she said, slicing carrots with more force than necessary. I thought maybe Emily had some kind of medical condition. Maybe she was sick or emotionally fragile. That's what I told myself to feel better about the eerie vibe that lingered every time she was near. As the days passed, I settled into a routine. Wake up at 5, start the laundry, prepare the guest rooms even though no guests ever came, polish the silverware, mop the grand staircase. The usual. Mr. Whitaker would leave early most mornings, dressed in tailored suits, briefcase in hand, climbing into one of his luxury cars. He rarely spoke to any of us unless he was giving orders. His presence filled the house even when he wasn't there. We all moved quietly, cautiously, like the walls themselves had ears. But at night, that's when things really got strange. The mansion was huge, too big for the small number of staff that worked there. And at night, with most of the lights off, the hallways felt endless. Shadows stretched across the floor, and every creak of the wooden beams sounded like footsteps coming from somewhere they shouldn't. It was on my third night that I first heard her. I had just finished folding towels in the linen room when I heard soft murmurs coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was the television from one of the guest rooms. But as I walked closer, I realized the voice was coming from Emily's room. I paused outside her door, my heart beating faster. She was talking to someone, but her words didn't make sense. Just fragments, repeated phrases. I didn't mean to. Stop. Stop. No more. Please. Her voice cracked at the end, almost like she was about to cry. I felt this overwhelming urge to knock on her door, to make sure she was okay. But then, I remembered the rule. Do not engage unless she speaks to you first. I stood there for what felt like forever, debating with myself. Finally, I turned away and walked back to my room, telling myself that maybe she was just having a nightmare. Maybe that's all it was. But that night, long after I crawled into bed, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I got up to use the bathroom at the end of the hall. As I stepped out into the corridor, I froze. There she was, Emily, barefoot, wearing the same pale blue dress, her hair covering most of her face. She was standing near the grand staircase, swaying slightly from side to side, and talking. But there was no one there. I couldn't hear her words clearly this time, just soft, urgent whispers. Her hands trembled at her sides, and every few seconds she would pause, tilt her head, like she was listening to someone speak back. I stood there, half hidden behind the corner, watching her. Every instinct in me screamed to go back to my room, to not get involved. But something told me, this was just the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. I stepped back quietly, holding my breath, and slipped inside my room, locking the door behind me. Little did I know, that night was just the first of many where Emily would roam the hallways, talking to people who weren't there. Working at the Whitaker mansion wasn't just a job. It was like entering a different world, one with its own set of unspoken laws, rules that weren't written down anywhere, but they were carved deep into everyone's mind the moment they stepped foot past those iron gates. From the very beginning, I understood that there were expectations. Expectations about how to clean, how to dress, how to speak, or more accurately, when not to speak. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized that the real rules, the ones that truly mattered, were the ones no one dared to say out loud. The first rule? Stay invisible. It didn't matter if you were scrubbing the marble floors or changing the linen in the guest rooms. If Mr. Whitaker was in the hallway, you were expected to vanish like a puff of smoke. We timed our cleaning schedules around his routines. If we knew he was in the library between 8 and 10, we didn't step within 10 feet of that hallway. If he was having dinner in the formal dining room, we used the servant passages to move between floors. There was no exception. Not unless you wanted to find your belongings packed and waiting for you by the front door the next morning. The second rule? Don't ask questions. It was tempting, believe me. Every day brought new curiosities. Why did the West Wing stay locked 24/7? Why did delivery drivers leave packages at the gate rather than come up to the house? Why did Mr. Whitaker's office phone have a second line with no caller ID? We were surrounded by mystery, but the weight of silence hung over us like a heavy curtain. And the third rule, the one that every single staff member whispered about behind closed doors? Stay away from Emily. She wasn't allowed visitors. Ever. Not friends, not tutors, not even distant relatives. Birthdays came and went without so much as a candle or a slice of cake. On holidays, While the rest of the house decorated and prepared special meals, Emily stayed locked away in her room. The only acknowledgement of her existence was a dinner tray left at her door at exactly 6:30 in the evening. If you were the unlucky one assigned to deliver it, you placed the tray down, knocked twice, and walked away without waiting for a response. And talking to her? That was out of the question. We were told, sternly and more than once, that under no circumstance were we to initiate conversation with her. If she spoke first, we could answer, but only briefly and only if necessary. The older staff had learned this the hard way. Rumor had it that one housekeeper had been fired on the spot, just for asking Emily if she wanted more towels. There were other strange rules, too, like the one about never leaving doors ajar. Every door had to be closed completely at all times. Windows, too. Even on hot days, we weren't allowed to crack them open. The excuse given was always the same: house security. But it felt like more than that. It felt like the house itself was a cage. Then there was the matter of the locks. Certain rooms were always locked. The west wing was the most obvious one, but Emily's bedroom also had an extra lock, on the outside. I noticed it one afternoon when I was dusting the upstairs corridor. At first I thought I was imagining things, but when I leaned in closer, I saw the heavy brass bolt attached to the doorframe. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure she couldn't leave without permission. For weeks I kept my head down and did my job. I didn't want trouble. But no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, there was something about Emily that pulled at me, like some invisible thread tying me to her sadness. It all came to a head one rainy Thursday afternoon. I had just finished ironing Mr. Whitaker's dress shirts when I realized we were running low on fabric softener. The laundry room was at the far end of the basement, past the storage closets and just before the old servants' quarters that nobody used anymore. I grabbed the empty bottle and headed downstairs. As I pushed open the laundry room door, I froze. There she was, Emily, sitting on the cold tile floor, knees pulled tight to her chest, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and her hair was a tangled mess that covered most of her face. For a second, I stood there like an idiot, holding the bottle of fabric softener in one hand, not knowing what to do. My heart dropped into my stomach. I had never seen her this close before. Up until that moment, she had been more of a presence than a person, a figure glimpsed from afar, a soft voice behind closed doors. Now she was real, tangibly, heartbreakingly real. I stepped forward instinctively. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Her head snapped up so fast it startled me. Her eyes, wide, glassy, and full of panic, locked onto mine. For a split second, she just stared at me, like she couldn't decide whether I was real or some figment of her imagination. Then, before I could say another word, she scrambled to her feet and bolted out the door, nearly knocking over a stack of laundry baskets on her way out. I stood there, still clutching the empty bottle, breathing hard like I had just witnessed something I wasn't meant to see. The rest of the day, I kept waiting for someone to say something. Maybe Emily would mention the encounter to her father. Maybe one of the other staff would report me for breaking the rules. But the hours ticked by, and nothing happened. Or at least, nothing happened until after dinner. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters when Martha, the cook, entered the room looking pale. "Claire?" she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "Mr. Whitaker wants to see you. Now." My stomach twisted into a knot. I wiped my hands on my apron and made my way down the long hallway to his study. The heavy wooden door loomed in front of me like the entrance to a dungeon. I knocked once, my heart in my throat. "Enter," came his voice, low and controlled. I opened the door and stepped inside. Mr. Whitaker sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. The lamp on his desk cast sharp shadows across his face, making the hollows under his eyes look even darker than usual. He didn't speak right away, just gestured for me to sit. I lowered myself onto the chair, feeling like a schoolgirl sent to the principal's office. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he leaned forward. "There are boundaries in this house, Claire," he said slowly, his voice as cold as the air conditioning vent blowing above my head. "Lines that are not to be crossed." I swallowed hard. unsure whether to speak or stay silent. "I'm not in the habit of discussing family matters with employees," he continued, "but I need you to understand something." He stood up then, walking around his desk until he was standing just a few feet from me. His presence felt suffocating. "My daughter has certain challenges. Emotional, psychological, whatever you want to call it. She's not well." His gaze hardened, like steel locking into place. "I'm telling you this only once. Don't get involved with my daughter's situation." The pause before that last word hung in the air like a threat. "Do your job. Keep to your assigned tasks. And leave her. To me." With that, he dismissed me with a flick of his hand. I walked out of that office with shaky legs, my mind spinning. That night, as I lay in my tiny basement room staring at the cracked ceiling, one thought kept replaying in my head over and over. What exactly did he mean by her situation? It started slowly, almost like the house was testing me, seeing how much I could ignore before I started to crack. The first few nights after that conversation with Mr. Whitaker, I told myself I was imagining things. Old houses creak, right? Wood settles, pipes groan, wind whistles through the cracks. That's what I kept repeating in my head like some desperate mantra every time I heard something that didn't make sense. But deep down, I knew better. It was a little past midnight the first time I heard it clearly. I had just turned off the bedside lamp and was pulling the blanket up to my chin when a soft, rhythmic sound drifted through the air vents. A low, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I sat up straight, my heart skipping a beat. At first, I stayed still, straining my ears, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The noise stopped just as suddenly as it started. I told myself it was probably just someone moving furniture upstairs. Maybe Mr. Whitaker decided he didn't like how his office desk was positioned. Maybe. The next night, the sounds changed. This time it was sobbing. So faint I almost missed it, but once I noticed it, it was impossible to unhear. The muffled cries floated through the air like a sad, broken lullaby, twisting their way down through the walls into the basement. It was definitely coming from somewhere upstairs. My first instinct was Emily. Who else could it be? But when I mentioned it the next morning to Martha, just in passing while pouring myself a cup of coffee, she froze mid-stir of her oatmeal. "I didn't hear anything," she said flatly, avoiding eye contact. "Really? Around midnight?" I pressed, watching her carefully. Her spoon clanged a little too hard against the bowl. "I said I didn't hear anything, and if you're smart, you didn't either." Then she picked up her bowl and left the room. That was the first time I realized that the staff knew more than they let on. Everyone walked around like they had blinders on, like they'd learned to tune out anything that wasn't part of their job description. I started noticing how quickly conversations changed whenever I entered a room. How glances between staff members lingered a little too long whenever Emily's name came up. There was a heaviness in the air, something thick and unspoken that wrapped around the mansion like a fog. A few nights later, the sounds escalated. I had been in the linen closet, grabbing extra sheets for one of the guest rooms, when a sudden scream tore through the stillness. A single, sharp, blood-curdling scream. High-pitched and raw. I dropped the stack of linens right there on the floor. My heart felt like it stopped. For a few seconds, I just stood frozen, staring at the ceiling above me. It came from the second floor. I was sure of it. Without thinking, I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. When I reached the landing, everything was silent again. Too silent. The kind of silence that feels intentional, like the house itself was holding its breath. I ran into Martha in the hallway. She was already there, standing like a statue, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" I gasped. Her expression didn't change. "You must have been dreaming," she said coldly, before turning and walking away without another word. Dreaming? No way. I wasn't crazy. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay awake, staring at the tiny crack where the ceiling met the wall, listening for any sound. Every time I closed my eyes, that scream played over and over again in my head. The next morning during my rounds, I noticed something odd near the staircase on the second floor. A deep scratch in the wooden floor, like something, or someone, had been dragged across it recently. The wood was chipped and raw, like it had been done with force. When I bent down to run my fingers over it, my skin prickled with goosebumps. Later that day, while dusting the picture frames along the main hallway, I overheard two of the junior maids whispering near the kitchen door. "She's getting worse," one of them said in a low voice. "Did you see the lock? They reinforced it again," the other replied. Before I could catch more, they noticed me standing nearby and immediately stopped talking. That was it. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I started paying closer attention to everything. Who entered which rooms? Which doors stayed closed? I noticed that Mr. Whitaker's study had a new key hanging on a hook inside. Small, brass, unmarked. Every night, around 10 o'clock, I saw him check that key, like some kind of ritual. And Emily, I barely saw her at all. Just a glimpse here or there. Once, I caught her standing at the end of the corridor, clutching a stuffed animal so tightly her knuckles were white. She vanished before I could even blink. What really pushed me over the edge was what happened 3 nights after the scream. I was making my way back to my room after locking up the dining hall when I noticed the West Wing door ajar. That door had always been locked. Always. My stomach twisted in knots, but curiosity overpowered my fear. I crept forward, moving as quietly as I could. The air beyond the door felt different. Colder somehow. The wallpaper lining the hall was faded and peeling, like no one had been down that corridor for years. The carpet was worn thin in the center, leaving a dark, exposed path where countless feet had once walked. I moved deeper inside, my pulse pounding in my ears. The hallway stretched farther than I expected. Several doors lined the walls, all closed, all except one at the very end, Emily's room. I knew it was hers, even before I got close enough to see the nameplate. An old, tarnished brass plate that simply read, Emily. My throat tightened. Her bedroom door wasn't just closed, it was bolted shut from the outside. A thick iron slide bolt, like something you'd use to secure a prison cell. It looked new. The wood around it still bore fresh drill marks and splinters. I stood there, staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing. I reached out slowly, letting my fingertips graze the cold metal of the lock. That's when I heard it. A faint sound from the other side of the door. Soft, barely there, breathing. And then, the quietest, most broken whisper I've ever heard. "Please." I jumped back, my heart leaping into my throat. But before I could react further, footsteps echoed from down the hall behind me. I spun around, my stomach lurching. Mr. Whitaker, standing there, watching me. I didn't know how long he'd been there, or how much he had seen. Without saying a word, he took a step toward me, and I instinctively ran back down the hallway, past the open West Wing door, all the way to the basement, where I locked myself inside my room and sat against the door, shaking. That night, for the first time since starting at the mansion, I cried myself to sleep. The days after that night in the West Wing passed like I was living in a fog. I went through the motions of my job, folding towels, dusting furniture, scrubbing floors, but my mind stayed trapped in that hallway, in front of Emily's bolted door. Every time I passed by the West Wing, now firmly locked again, I felt the weight of that whisper, that single broken word. Please. I barely saw her after that. Only glimpses. A flash of her blue dress disappearing around a corner, the creak of her bedroom door closing quickly whenever I came too close. But even those brief moments stirred something inside me. A deep, unsettling ache I couldn't shake off. I started watching for her more carefully, lingering a little longer in the hallways she might pass through, walking slower near the stairs where she sometimes stood staring at nothing, listening for any sound that might tell me she was near. But Emily stayed silent, more silent than ever. Then, one afternoon, something changed. It was laundry day. I was standing in the basement sorting through a mountain of bedsheets and towels. The other housekeeper on shift, Maria, had left for her break, so I was alone. I grabbed the next pile of clothes and noticed something odd. Near the bottom of the stack, tucked under a folded pillowcase, was a small piece of paper. Folded twice, edges crinkled, and clearly out of place among the linens. For a moment, I just stared at it, heart pounding in my chest. Hands trembling, I unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, but the message was clear enough. Please help me. There's something hidden in the library. No greeting, no signature. But I didn't need one. I knew exactly who had written it. I stood there frozen, reading it over and over like maybe the words would change, make more sense. The library. That was another locked room, always off limits to the staff. I had never been inside, not once in all the time I'd worked here. I shoved the note deep into my apron pocket, my fingers shaking as I did it. The rest of the day, I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified Mr. Whitaker had seen Emily slip me the note somehow. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, my heart jumped into my throat. But nothing happened. No angry summons to his office. No sudden dismissal. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. That night, after dinner, I sat on my bed staring at the folded paper again. My mind swirled with questions. What could she mean? What was in the library? And why reach out to me now, after all this time? I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore her. The next morning, I started asking questions. Carefully, of course. Casual. Subtle. I didn't want to raise any alarms. Over tea in the kitchen, I turned to Martha. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I began, keeping my voice light. She glanced at me over her glasses. "Depends. Emily, has she always lived here? I mean, was she born in this house?" Martha's spoon paused mid-stir. "That's not something we talk about," she said, her tone dropping an octave. I forced a nervous laugh. "I just realized I've never seen any photos of her as a baby, or of her mother. There aren't any family pictures anywhere." Martha's face tightened. "Best if you don't go digging into things that don't concern you," she said, standing abruptly and walking out of the room. Her reaction only fueled my curiosity. Later that afternoon, while changing sheets in the guest wing, I cornered James, the groundskeeper. James had worked for the Whitakers even longer than I had. If anyone knew something, it would be him. "James," I called, pretending to adjust the curtain tiebacks as he passed by with a toolbox. "Do you remember Mrs. Whitaker? What was she like?" He froze mid-step. For a long second, he didn't answer. Then, without turning around, he said in a low voice, "None of us ever met her." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. "I've worked here for over a decade. Never saw her. Not once. No photos, no visits. Mr. Whitaker never talks about her." I opened my mouth to ask more, but James walked away before I could. That was it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The house was full of ghosts, and I was starting to think Emily wasn't the only one trapped here. By the time evening came, I had made up my mind. I needed to get into the library. After finishing my chores for the day, I waited until after 10 o'clock, when most of the staff had gone to their quarters, and Mr. Whitaker retreated to his study with a glass of bourbon like he always did. I moved silently through the halls, my heart pounding so loud in my ears I was sure someone would hear. The door to the library stood at the end of the eastern corridor, tall and imposing, with a dark oak frame and a brass handle that gleamed even in the dim light. I stood in front of it for a full minute, just staring. The key, I knew where it was kept. On the hook inside Mr. Whitaker's study, but getting it without him noticing would be impossible. Unless the door was unlocked tonight. Just maybe. I reached out and turned the handle. Locked. Of course it was. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for any sound inside. Silence. But as I stood there, feeling the cool brass under my palm, a thought occurred to me. Emily's note hadn't just been a desperate cry. It had been a clue. A direction. There was something behind this door she wanted me to find. What? I didn't know yet. Secrets? Answers? Maybe something even darker? My stomach twisted as I backed away slowly. I wasn't ready to break into the study. Not yet. But soon. Very soon. I stood there for another long moment, staring at the locked door of the library, wondering how many lies were trapped on the other side, and how far I was willing to go to uncover them. Opportunity doesn't knock twice in a place like the Whitaker mansion. When it comes, it whispers, and you either listen or you spend the rest of your life regretting it. Mr. Whitaker had left for a business trip that morning. A driver picked him up at exactly 6:30, just like always, and by 7 o'clock, the house felt like it had exhaled for the first time in days. The staff walked a little lighter, spoke a little freer. Even Martha cracked a tired smile while prepping lunch in the kitchen. But I had no interest in enjoying the temporary peace. I had been waiting for this chance for weeks. I knew where the key to the library was. I'd watched Mr. Whitaker hang it on the same hook inside his study every single night like clockwork. What I didn't know was whether he'd remembered to leave it behind before his trip. My heart was in my throat as I slipped into the study when no one was looking. My fingers shook as I reached for the hook, and there it was. The small brass key. I wrapped it in a dish towel, shoved it deep into my apron pocket, and walked out of that study like I hadn't just committed the most reckless act of my life. Later that afternoon, when the rest of the staff were busy in the garden doing seasonal trimming, I made my move. I walked to the eastern corridor, my shoes barely making a sound on the polished floors. The library door loomed ahead like a gatekeeper to every secret I'd been aching to uncover. I slipped the key into the lock. My pulse roared in my ears as I turned it. Click. The door swung open with a soft groan. The air inside was thick and still, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Dust particles floated in the golden light that streamed through the high-arched windows. The smell was a mixture of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly bitter. I stepped inside, quietly closing the door behind me. The room was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on every wall. Thousands of books, maybe more. Heavy leather-bound volumes, some so old the spines had crumbled into flakes. A massive oak desk sat in the center, topped with scattered papers, a globe, and a small brass lamp. But my focus wasn't on the books. I scanned the walls, the floor, the corners. Something had to be here. Emily's note had been clear. There's something hidden in the library. I started at the far left shelf, running my fingers along the wood paneling, tapping lightly on random spots, listening for hollow sounds. After 20 minutes of searching, frustration began to bubble in my chest. What if I had misunderstood her? What if she meant something symbolic? Or worse, what if it was all just some elaborate prank? But then, near the corner behind the globe, my knuckle hit something different. A dull, hollow thud. I froze. I pressed my palm flat against the shelf and pushed. Nothing. I tried pulling. Still nothing. Then, on instinct, I reached up and tugged on the thickest book on the shelf, a dusty red leather volume with no title on the spine. There was a soft click. The entire section of shelving shifted forward about an inch. My heart nearly stopped. I grabbed the edge of the shelf and pulled. With a low groan of old hinges, the hidden door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark passage. I hesitated only for a second before stepping inside. The air was colder here, stale and dry, like it hadn't circulated in years. I fumbled along the wall until my fingers found a light switch. When I flipped it on, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered to life. The room was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, and several cardboard boxes sat stacked in the corner. Against the far wall stood an old, cracked leather chair, and next to it, a small wooden table covered in folders, photographs, and loose papers. I stepped closer, my breath hitching in my throat as I picked up one of the photographs. It was Emily, but not the Emily I knew. This was her as a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Her hair was longer, her cheeks fuller, her smile wide and bright. I flipped through more photos. Emily on a swing set. Emily holding a birthday cake with pink frosting. Emily sitting on a woman's lap. A woman with soft brown eyes and dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. I held that last photo tighter, staring at the woman. There was no doubt in my mind. This had to be Emily's mother. My hands trembled as I picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping from the pile. The headline read, "Local Woman Missing. Police Investigation Ongoing." The article detailed the sudden disappearance of a woman named Margaret Whitaker, last seen nearly 10 years ago. No witnesses, no suspects, just gone. I swallowed hard, scanning the rest of the article. The name of the investigating detective was circled in red ink. I rifled through the folders next, finding medical files, thick, disturbing stacks of them, psychological evaluations, all of them about Emily. Page after page, labeling her with terms I barely understood but instantly recognized as cold and clinical. Severe emotional instability, possible psychosis, unfit for socialization, threat to self, and at the bottom of each report, Mr. Whitaker's signature, authorizing treatments, medications, isolation. I felt physically sick. None of this made sense. Emily wasn't dangerous. She was scared, isolated, desperate. Every instinct I had screamed that something about these reports was wrong. They felt manufactured, too clean, too convenient. One file stood out. It was thinner than the rest, tucked beneath a stack of invoices. Inside, there were handwritten notes. Mr. Whitaker's handwriting. I recognized it from the lists he sometimes left for the staff. Continue regimen. Increased doses starting next month. Night episodes worsening. Maintain bedroom lock at all times. Library room to remain restricted. No staff access under any circumstances. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't care. This was control. Containment. I flipped back to the photos, my eyes landing on one more that sent a chill down my spine. A photo of the same woman, Margaret Whitaker, but this time, it looked like a surveillance shot. Grainy, taken from a distance. She was walking down a city street, wearing sunglasses and a scarf, looking over her shoulder like she knew she was being watched. The date scrawled in pen across the corner stopped me cold. It was dated nearly 2 years after the newspaper said she'd gone missing. I barely had time to process that before I heard it. A door slamming downstairs. My heart stopped. No, it couldn't be. But then came the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps crossing the foyer floor. Mr. Whitaker. He was back. Way too early. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to gather the papers, stuffing them back into folders as quickly as I could. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped everything twice. I flipped the light switch off and pulled the hidden door closed, just as I heard him calling out from below. "Claire?" His voice echoed up the staircase, cold and sharp. I bolted from the library, heart hammering against my ribs, and ran down the back corridor toward the staff quarters, praying he wouldn't notice that the library door had been unlocked. I didn't stop until I was safe behind my bedroom door, sliding to the floor, my chest heaving. The truth about Emily, about her mother, it was worse than I imagined, and I had just scratched the surface. For the next few days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were the photographs, the forged medical reports, and that date scribbled on the corner of the surveillance picture of Emily's mother. Every footstep in the hallway, every creak in the floorboards made me jump. Mr. Whitaker moved through the house like a shadow, more watchful than usual. I could feel his suspicion in the air, like a storm cloud gathering over the mansion. I did everything I could to act normal. Scrubbing floors with extra focus, folding linens perfectly, avoiding unnecessary eye contact. But deep inside, a knot of dread and determination twisted tighter with every passing hour. Emily. She was the only thing I could think about. I had no idea if she knew I had been inside the library, but that answer came sooner than I expected. It happened on a rainy afternoon, when the rest of the staff were busy preparing the formal dining room for one of Mr. Whitaker's rare business dinners. I was in the storage closet near the west wing, sorting through cleaning supplies, when I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned to find her standing there. Emily. For the first time, she was looking directly at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide but focused. The constant fog of confusion that usually clouded her expression was gone, replaced by something sharper, fear mixed with determination. Before I could speak, she brought her finger to her lips in a silent plea for me to stay quiet. Then she glanced over her shoulder to make sure we were alone. In the faintest whisper, she said, "I need to leave. Tonight." I stared at her, barely able to process what I was hearing. She took a step closer, her hands shaking. "He knows I've been looking. He knows you've been helping." My heart sank. I opened my mouth to deny it, but she shook her head quickly, like she didn't have time for games. "I heard him on the phone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's planning something. I don't know what, but I can't stay here anymore." Every instinct inside me screamed that helping her would mean crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But when I looked at her, really looked at her, all I saw was a terrified girl standing on the edge of something terrible. I nodded. Okay, we'll figure something out. The plan formed in rushed, breathless moments. After dinner, when the staff would be cleaning the kitchen and Mr. Whitaker would retreat to his study, Emily would slip out of her room. I would meet her by the service entrance near the laundry room. From there, we could sneak through the side garden and make it to the perimeter wall. There was a section near the south end where the ivy was thick enough to climb over. I had seen James, the groundskeeper, fix a gap in the wall a few months earlier. It wouldn't be easy, but it was her best chance. We kept our interaction short, pretending like we'd never spoken as soon as footsteps echoed down the hallway. The hours dragged painfully slow until nightfall. As the house settled into its nightly routine, I moved through the mansion like I always did. I changed pillowcases, dusted the picture frames in the hallway, emptied the trash bins. But every task felt mechanical. My thoughts stayed locked on Emily, imagining her packing whatever little she had, waiting for my signal. By the time the clock in the main foyer struck 10, I grabbed a flashlight and slipped toward the back stairwell. I reached the laundry room and waited by the door, heart pounding. Minutes passed. Finally, I heard soft footsteps approaching. Emily appeared in the doorway, wearing a hooded sweater and clutching a small canvas bag. For the first time, I saw her smile, a tiny, flickering thing, but real. We're almost there, I whispered. I opened the door that led to the side garden and poked my head out. The night air was cool and heavy with the scent of wet grass. The garden stretched out before us, moonlight casting pale shadows across the hedges. We slipped outside, moving quickly but quietly along the stone path. We were halfway to the outer wall when it happened. A loud metallic clang echoed from the front gate. I froze. Emily did too. The security lights around the property flickered to life, bathing the garden in harsh white beams. Then I heard it. Mr. Whitaker's voice, booming across the grounds like a curse. "She's gone! Lock the gates! No one leaves this property!" Panic surged through me. From the corner of my eye, I saw staff members emerging from the side entrance and the garage. James and two of the junior housekeepers were already spreading out, searching the grounds with flashlights. "He knows," Emily gasped, her face draining of color. I grabbed her hand. "This way." We ran back toward the house, ducking behind a row of hedges just as two security guards rushed past. I pulled Emily toward the maintenance shed, yanking open the door, but it was padlocked. My mind raced. Where? Where could we hide? Then I remembered the storage closet near the kitchen pantry. Small, dark, rarely used except for storing extra cleaning supplies. I led her around the back of the house, through the staff entrance, and down the narrow hallway toward the kitchen. The noise of Mr. Whitaker shouting orders grew louder behind us. "Search every room, every closet." She couldn't have gotten far. My fingers fumbled as I opened the storage closet door. "Inside. Now," I whispered. Emily crawled inside, crouching low between boxes of detergent and old mop buckets. I squeezed in next to her and pulled the door shut just as heavy footsteps approached the hallway. I held my breath, barely daring to move. Through the thin crack in the door, I saw Mr. Whitaker himself pass by, flanked by two staff members. His face was twisted in rage, his voice tight with fury. "She's in the house. I can feel it," he growled. Emily trembled beside me, pressing her fist against her mouth to keep from making a sound. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, holding her tight as the footsteps faded down the hallway. But I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. We stayed hidden in that storage closet for what felt like hours. The air grew hot and stale, thick with the scent of bleach and dust, but neither of us dared to move. Every few minutes, we heard footsteps rush past, voices barking orders, doors slamming open and shut. Mr. Whitaker had unleashed everyone. Staff who had always seemed too timid to question anything were now turning over furniture, ripping apart linen closets, checking behind curtains like their lives depended on it. Emily's body trembled against mine, her breathing shallow and fast. I kept my arm around her, holding her close, feeling how frail she was, how small. Every time a noise got too close, she'd flinch like she was waiting for a blow. At one point, I heard Mr. Whitaker's voice again, low and dangerous. "Keep looking. I want every inch of this house searched. She couldn't have disappeared. Eventually, the sounds of the search began to move farther away. Doors slammed shut again, footsteps faded, and I knew they had shifted their focus to the garden or maybe the perimeter walls. Only then did I risk whispering, "We can't stay here much longer." Emily nodded, her eyes wide but filled with something new. Resolve. We waited a few more minutes to be sure the hallway was clear before I slowly pushed the closet door open. The hallway was empty. I grabbed her hand and led her quietly back toward the basement, where we could hide safely for a little while longer. Once we reached my tiny room, I locked the door behind us and pulled the curtains tight. Emily sat on the edge of my bed, clutching her canvas bag to her chest like it was a life vest keeping her afloat. I knelt in front of her. "Emily," I whispered, "we don't have much time. You need to tell me what's really going on." For a long moment, she just sat there staring at the floor. Her fingers twisted into the fabric of her sweater until her knuckles turned white. Then, without looking up, she started to speak. Her voice was soft, shaking, but steady enough that I understood every word. "They told everyone that my mother left," she began, "that she got tired of this life, tired of me, that she just walked away one night and never came back." Emily paused, swallowing hard, her throat bobbing as she fought back tears. "But that's not true." I stayed perfectly still, letting her find her pace. "She loved me," Emily whispered. "She never would have left me. I know that. I remember her, holding me when I had nightmares, reading to me by the window, singing to me when I couldn't sleep." Her voice cracked, and I reached out, placing my hand gently over hers. "One night, when I was about 7, I woke up to the sound of them fighting, screaming. It wasn't like before. It was worse. I crept out of my room and hid at the top of the stairs. I heard her begging him to stop, telling him she'd go to the police if he didn't let her leave with me." Emily's shoulders shook violently, but she pressed on. "The next morning, she was gone. Just gone. And Mr. Whitaker told everyone she had abandoned us." Her breath hitched, and for a moment she buried her face in her hands, but then she pulled herself together and continued. "I didn't believe him. I never did. So I started looking. As I got older, I searched every part of this house I could get into without being caught. Behind vents, under floorboards, in the attic, anywhere I thought she might have left something for me." She reached into her bag then and pulled out a small, battered shoebox. "I found these," she said, handing it to me. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside were several folded letters, yellowed with age, and 2 small cassette tapes. I unfolded the first letter carefully. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, like it had been written under pressure. "My darling Emily, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't get us both out. But I want you to know this wasn't your fault. Never blame yourself. I love you more than anything in this world. And if you're brave enough, find the truth. Don't let him erase me." I felt the tears sting my eyes as I read. I glanced at Emily. "Have you listened to the tapes?" She nodded. "I found an old player hidden in the storage room. I've listened to them dozens of times." Her voice, it's the only thing that kept me sane. She held up one of the tapes like it was sacred. She talks about how scared she was, how she thought Mr. Whitaker was going to hurt her. She says if anything happened to her, to look in the library. That explained the note she left me. "But why all those fake reports? The medical files?" I asked. Emily's eyes darkened. "After she disappeared, he started taking me to doctors, ones who only said what he wanted them to say. I wasn't allowed to speak freely during appointments. Every time I tried to tell someone the truth, he found a way to punish me, locking me in my room, new medications, making the staff watch me like I was dangerous. The pieces were falling into place so fast it made my head spin. The locked bedroom door, the endless pills, the isolation. He's been building a case against me for years," Emily continued. "So if I ever did manage to escape, no one would believe me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This went so far beyond overprotectiveness or strict parenting. This was control, manipulation, abuse. And now I was in this too. We need to get these letters and tapes out of the house," I said firmly. "We need to make copies, and we need to go to the police." Emily's face paled at the word police, but she nodded. I grabbed an old backpack from my closet and carefully placed the letters and tapes inside. "We'll hide this in the garden shed for now," I whispered. "It's the one place I know Mr. Whitaker never goes. Tomorrow morning I'll leave early and head into town. I'll find a way to make copies. After that, we go to the authorities." Emily clutched my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice shaking with both fear and hope. "Promise you won't leave me alone in this." I looked her straight in the eyes. "I promise." As we sat there together in the dark, planning the next steps, I knew there was no turning back. Not now. Not after what I had seen and what I had heard. Mr. Whitaker had buried the truth for too long. But we were going to dig it up, piece by piece. I didn't sleep at all that night. Not a single minute. I lay there on my narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of my basement room, replaying every step of our plan over and over in my mind. The letters were hidden. The tapes, carefully wrapped in plastic and buried behind a loose board in the garden shed, right beneath a stack of old broken tools. Emily stayed locked in my room with the door bolted, curled up in the farthest corner like she was afraid that at any moment he'd come crashing through the door. I kept glancing at the clock on my nightstand, watching the minutes crawl by. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made my heart race. When the first light of dawn began to push through the small window near the ceiling, I grabbed my coat and slipped out of the house, making sure no one saw me. I walked nearly 2 miles to reach the gas station on the edge of town. From there, I used the payphone, dialing the number of the local police department with trembling fingers. I told them everything, not just about the missing woman, but about the psychological abuse, the fake reports, the locked doors, the evidence we had. I left out my own trespassing into the library for the time being. I figured they could yell at me for that later. I gave them the address. I told them they needed to come quickly. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. They said officers would be sent within the hour. I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of terror and relief. By the time I got back to the mansion, the household was already stirring. Mr. Whitaker was in his usual spot in the dining room, reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee like he hadn't spent the night orchestrating a manhunt on his own property. But I noticed it. A subtle tension in the air. He was on edge. His eyes flicked toward every staff member who passed too close. He knew Emily was still here somewhere. I went straight to my room, checking on Emily. She was awake, sitting on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the door like she expected it to burst open any second. "It's happening today," I whispered to her. "They're coming." Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak, just nodded, biting her lips so hard it almost drew blood. We didn't have to wait long. By mid-morning, I heard it. The distant crunch of tires on gravel, voices outside. I moved quickly. "Come on," I whispered, pulling Emily to her feet. "We're going to the living room." Her face went pale. "Why?" "Because we're done hiding." Hand in hand, we crept up the back stairs and through the servant hallway until we reached the main foyer. The front doors were still closed, but I could already see 2 police cars parked outside through the tall glass windows. Mr. Whitaker was standing near the fireplace in the living room, his back to us, phone in hand. He turned the second he heard us enter. The look on his face? I'll never forget it. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "Claire," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Emily tightened her grip on my hand, trembling but standing her ground. I stepped forward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "I know everything," I said. "About Margaret. About the fake reports. About what you've done to Emily." His face turned a shade paler, just for a split second, before the anger returned. "You're out of line," he snarled, taking a step toward us. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Pack your things and get out before I didn't let him finish. "The police are already here," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough for everyone in the house to hear. "They know. They're coming in." As if on cue, the front door opened. 2 officers entered first, 1 male and 1 female, their hands resting near their holsters but not drawn. 2 more followed close behind, along with a detective I recognized from the name on the newspaper clipping I found in the library file. "Mr. Whitaker?" the lead detective called out, stepping forward. "We need to speak with you. Now." For a moment, Mr. Whitaker stood there frozen, his eyes darting between me, Emily, and the officers. Then something in him snapped. Without warning, he lunged toward Emily. I barely had time to react. One of the officers did, though. "Sir, step back, now!" Within seconds, Mr. Whitaker was grabbed, pulled away from us, and shoved down onto the floor. His hands were yanked behind his back, cold steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists. Even then, as they dragged him to his feet, he didn't stop glaring at me. "This isn't over," he hissed under his breath, his voice venomous. The officers led him outside, pushing him into the back of one of the squad cars. Emily stood there next to me, shaking like a leaf, her breathing shallow and rapid. I turned to her, placing both hands on her shoulders. "It's over," I said, though part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. Not yet. But for now, this chapter was closing. The detective stayed behind to gather the evidence. I handed over the letters, the tapes, and the copies I had made earlier that morning at a small printing shop in town. The officers also took photos of the lock on Emily's bedroom door, the medical files I had found, and even the hidden room behind the library shelf. For the first time in years, the mansion felt lighter. Later that afternoon, I walked Emily out the front door. She paused at the top of the steps, looking back at the house that had held her prisoner for most of her life. Her face was a mix of fear, sadness, and something else. Hope. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just walked. Both of us. One foot in front of the other. It's strange looking back now. I spent 8 years working for that man. 8 years following his rules, keeping my head down, telling myself that what happened behind closed doors wasn't my business. But deep down, I always knew something wasn't right. And when the time came to choose, between keeping my job or saving that girl, I chose her. I think about it all the time now. What if I hadn't? What if I had kept my mouth shut? So I guess now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have risked your job, your safety, maybe even your freedom, to help someone crying out for help? Or would you have looked the other way, like so many others did? Tell me in the comments. Be honest. Would you have gotten involved or stayed silent? And if you want to hear more stories like this, real stories, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button, because there's so much more I need to tell you.